Welcome back to the podcast. It's the Limelight Highlight. I am your host, as always, Jonathan Rosario, and you're listening to the podcast that highlights all things positive and brings them into the limelight. Today, I am honored by the love of my life, Arlene Sanchez, my beautiful wife. You want to say hi on the mic?
Hello.
Yes. If you're wondering, yes, my last name is Rosario. Her last name is Sanchez. She refused to take my name because she's a strong, independent woman. And what better way to honor Women's History Month with an independent woman on the mic, right?
Right.
Yeah. Hey. So we've been actually discussing a lot of women empowerment and independency. And the reason Arlene's on the podcast is because she's going to share some of her ideas and opinions on why she thinks this month is such a powerful thing. Yeah? Right? No?
Sure.
Okay, so what's up? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on?
So I was reading a little bit about Women's History Month, and I was actually noticing that there's people who don't agree with having a Women's History Month. There was this one tweet that I read that said, the earth, water, and women get one day a month in celebration. And they basically were saying like they don't want to be a part of that. And I kind of, being the person that I am, I was like, yeah, totally. Like, why do we only get a month? But then I kept reading other people's opinions, and they actually point out that we need a month because if you look in the past and all the things that we learned as kids, like me for one, there's not a lot of powerful women that I can name off the top of my head. Like, I was really nervous about being on this podcast because there's not a lot of names that I can name off the top of my head because you can't find them in history books. And so I think that's the reason that we need things like Black History Month and Women's History Month to highlight these women until it becomes a regular topic of women that are able to do things that everyone else can do because they're simply human, not because they're women.
Okay. I know when I first started, the podcast is actually opening my mind to Women's History Month because I fall into the same category where you don't know exactly what those women by name, they're not like predominant figures throughout history in your history books and everything like that. Obviously, you always hear about the men conquering shit, but when it comes to women, like, I didn't know it started with Women's History Day, International Women's Day, which is March 8th, which just recently passed when we saw Captain Marvel. Hey, that was very good sneak right there on Disney. A little homage to International Women's Day. But that was all the way back in the 1900s, like early 1900s. And then it turned into the week, and now it's a month. So with that being said, you have a month, and you have, like, even though it's a month, like it's Women's History Month, I didn't, like, even to this year, just last year, on the last podcast I was talking about, I didn't know they had themes until you told me there's a theme. And I'm like, what? I didn't know there was themes. And even then, with it being more and more popular because we're kind of like trying to be more inclusive and highlight those things, I still didn't know much. Like, I don't feel like Women's History Month is even being popularized that much. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I don't understand why that is.
I think it's mainly because it's associated with feminism, and feminism has gotten a really bad rep. Like, even a simple thing where people say, oh, feminists like burn bras. If you actually read the history, like, no bras were actually burned. I was reading about this, and I don't remember the full story. I think the idea probably was for these women to do that, but they couldn't. So they actually just ended up like throwing bras in a trash can. But there was no, like, they didn't go like set fire to bras. Like little things like that have gotten so out of hand to make feminism seem like, I don't know, just a whole lot worse than what it is, when really it's just supposed to be an inclusive idea. Like, if you can be a man and be a feminist because you believe in equality for women. So I think like Women's History Month gets associated with those things instead of just focusing on all the things that women have actually brought. Like, the leaders that were back in the past, something like Cleopatra, like just governing, like somebody like that is the people that we should remember or think about. And again, I there's not too many names that I can name, and that's completely my fault. Like, I should probably educate myself more.
Not
but
everybody's a history major. I damn for sure don't know.
Yeah, but there's men in history that I can name. Well,
that's because we're so indoctrinated into the history books and social studies and different things of that nature that we hear you're never going to forget Julius Caesar, the conqueror, or I'm sorry, not the conqueror, but Alexander the Great, the conqueror, Genghis Khan, a conqueror, Christopher Columbus, an explorer. Like, you don't hear the people who fund those things behind the books because it's always been highlighted as a man. I was speaking about this on the last podcast, how women are always, your job is to cook, your job is to clean, your job is to be in the kitchen and stay home with the kids. Because for so many years in American, which is super crazy because it's only an American culture, not only, but mainly in American culture that happened. Because I know when I got on that rant or that tangent where I was going down that rabbit hole of the Taino Indians and Puerto Ricans and our heritage, it was all the matriarchy. It wasn't a patriarchy. The women were the ones who you found the bloodline who's going to be the next chieftain. The women were the ones who said, now we're going to have sex or not. They were the ones they basically made the structure of a hierarchy in that tribe, not the men. Obviously the men were the leaders, but they didn't lead shit until the women said so. So once again, going back to American history, you hear these ridiculous ideas of, no, your job is to do this and do that and do this. And it just comes from, way far back. And for some reason, that stigma has stuck so much. And like you said, indoctrinated to the point where our history books, you can't even name a woman who was a huge leader until recently,
No, and I'm sure they're there, but I think like again, it wasn't something that we focused on maybe all year round. It was like, this is Women's History Month, this is when you're going to learn about it, and then that was kind of the majority of it. Like, that was the huge focus on it. So I think, like, again, I think it's something that we need because it just kind of it brings it forth. It puts you in that mindset so that you can remember and you can repeat these names, and people understand like, oh, okay, I can do this now because of this person, as far as equal rights and those women activists that we had that have given us the power to do all the things that we can do today, whether it's wear whatever the hell we want, vote, and just generally be open, have opinions.
Yeah.
Leader, women's march, things like that would have gotten us in a whole lot more trouble.
Yeah, which is crazy because this was probably a huge reaction to Trump being voted in. The whole women's march in 2016. It was a huge turnout, but the following years weren't as big. And I don't know what the cause of that is, but once again, you go back to what you were saying with the feminist stuff, and the word feminist has been backed so much by these extremists, these women who don't want the door open for them, or they don't want to be referred to as somebody dainty or something like that, which is really, I get the sentiment behind it, but as I said before, being that strict with society and men treating you a certain way, you're not going to get anything done. You're going to, create this movement or this ideology behind feminism where it's like, I don't want to be associated with that. Those women are prude. They're not, that there's no conversation to be had. So yeah, it's just certain things like that nature. But, there's a lot of things that have improved since back then, which is pretty crazy. I know I was listing off a bunch of stuff, and I actually got an email from one of the listeners, and they told me I got a little bit wrong on all those crazy facts that women still kind of go through today. And one of them being Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia being one of the last countries to keep women from driving. So from what I got was they lifted the ban on female drivers back in June. So it's still pretty fresh. Granted, it hasn't been a complete year yet, but it was a few months back. Before, they just had to depend on chauffeurs, male relatives to travel anywhere via car. And now they're saying more than 3 million women would receive licenses by 2020, which is just, next year, like 3 million women just by next year. Unfortunately, accidents have actually gone up dramatically.
I know that's satisfying for you.
No, that's a joke. I didn't look up that statistic at all. I kind of just brought it up myself because, a little sexist joke isn't the worst thing.
It's a great day to do that.
But the Prince Mohammed bin Salman, apparently he's like a super libertarian prince as far as that area of the country is concerned. And he kind of launched a vision in 2030, a vision by 2030 to have more tourists and investors, health and education and infrastructure for all people, not just men. And he also lifted the ban on women attending movies, music, concerts with men, because they could do that before, but it wasn't a what's that word? When two people are allowed to do things that, like, two people of different sexes. Anyway, you know what I mean.
Co-ed.
Yeah, there you go. Co-ed. Yeah. See, I know you know the word. But yeah, just what are your thoughts on those ridiculous laws all the way out in the Middle East, and how? Remember, I told you when I went to Dubai and all those things. So
that's a really difficult opinion for me to have because of this argument that we constantly have, where I always tell you that I cannot base my opinion on something that I've never been through. Because yes, I can assume that those women were not happy not having those rights, but there could be women who were like completely okay with that. You understand what I mean?
I get that, but at the same time, for me, it's one of those, yeah, they're okay with it only because they're so indoctrinated. Just like slavery. People were okay with slavery back in the day because it was just a normal thing for them. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And, obviously you're going to have people like, no matter what, slavery is wrong. Back in the day, you weren't looked at like, oh, you're a disgusting human being because you have slaves. You were looked at like, oh, you got a lot of money because you got slaves. Or you got slaves because you got a lot of money, vice versa. So when I say, we can see the numbers here. Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia, 3 million women in just a year. Or I'm sorry, less than 2 years, 3 million women. There's like a huge wait list now for people to go to traffic school or whatever the kind of system they're setting up for women to drive. That has to speak volumes. When I was reading that article, they were saying how some people, women that got caught driving, were arrested and detained for more than 70 days in a prison for excuse me, I didn't mean this, for driving. You know what I mean? And it's things like that where I just can't get behind the thought of people being okay with that. Yeah,
no, that obviously that makes it a little more real, like seeing that the repercussions for that. But I think just as far as having an opinion on it, obviously I don't completely agree with it. I remember when you came back from Dubai and I was so excited to go visit there, and you were like, I don't know, I don't feel like it's a place you'd be okay with. I didn't understand. I thought, okay, like he obviously just doesn't want to take me to Dubai, right? But now
it's expensive, girl.
Now realizing like I wouldn't be able to handle having to, obviously we'd be there as tourists, but I wouldn't be able to handle even seeing a woman having to walk so much further behind a man, or whatever the cases were, whatever if they're not still current, having to ride in the cab in the back, or like little things like that. To me, it's like, I don't know. It's just, it's hard for me to even believe that there's other women living like that still in this day and age because of all the freedom that we do have here. And yet we still don't have all the freedom that we want or deserve.
Right. Which also screams volumes as to how, essentially, no matter what your feelings are, how free America is.
Yeah.
I know people have their opinions and they want to, talk about America, but at the end of the day, this is legit the most liberal country for everyone. And granted, like I said before, you're always going to have your exceptions.